The lock clicked so sharply that every voice in the room died at once. Everyone, leave, now. No one moved. The rehearsal room smelled of sweat, rainwater, and the faint scent of old wooden floors that had absorbed years of dreams and failures. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky, shaking the windows just enough to make the silence feel alive. Inside, 7 pairs of eyes stared at Hyun, whose trembling hand remained firmly wrapped around the cold metal doorknob. Only Felix stood still beside the wall, his breathing shallow, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. I said leave. There was no anger in Hyun's voice. That was what frightened everyone. His voice was quiet, empty, as if every emotion had already burned itself to ashes. Ethan took one cautious step forward. Hyun, talk to us. No. Another step. We're your family. Hyun's eyes lifted slowly. If you still believe that, then leave. The word struck harder than any scream. For months the group had lived together, laughed together, and survived every exhausting performance together. They had believed nothing could fracture the bond they had built. Through countless sleepless nights, they had been wrong. One by one they backed toward the door. Not because they wanted to leave, because something inside, Hyun's expression, warned them that forcing their way closer would only shatter him completely. The last person stepped outside. Hyun closed the door. The lock turned again. Silence. Only Felix remained. He didn't ask why. He simply watched Hyun collapse against the door as if every bone inside his body had suddenly disappeared. His shoulders shook. Not with rage, with exhaustion. Felix slowly walked over before lowering himself onto the floor beside him. Neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence instead. Several minutes passed before Hyun whispered without looking up. I couldn't tell them. Felix answered softly. I know. You don't know. I know enough. Hyun laughed once. It wasn't really laughter. It sounded more like something breaking. You always pretend everything is okay. Felix smiled faintly. So do you. For the first time that night, Hyun looked directly into his friend's eyes. Felix's smile had always been warm. Tonight it looked fragile. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, tiny cuts across his knuckles, a bruise almost hidden beneath his sleeve. Hyun had noticed them weeks ago. He had simply waited. He knew Felix would never speak unless someone waited long enough. I found the letters, Hyun finally admitted. Felix froze. I threw them away. I know. You thought if nobody knew, nobody would worry. Felix lowered his head. The room suddenly felt much colder. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping endlessly against the glass. Hyun reached into his jacket pocket and placed a thick bundle of folded envelopes on the floor between them. They were worn, some stained by rain, others by tears. Every envelope carried the same handwriting. Felix stared at them as though they were ghosts returning from the past. I burned most of them, Hyun said quietly. I couldn't burn the last ones. You shouldn't have read them. I had to. Another silence settled between them. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Somewhere in the building an air conditioner groaned to life. Life continued outside that room. Inside, time refused to move. Felix slowly reached for the letters but stopped halfway. They were never supposed to become your burden. Hyun shook his head. They became mine the moment I realized you were carrying them alone. Felix closed his eyes. For years he had perfected the habit of smiling through every ache. It had become instinct. Whenever cameras appeared, he smiled. Whenever friends asked if he was okay, he smiled. Whenever loneliness settled beside him late at night, he smiled until even he believed it. But paper never lied. Ink never smiled. Every sentence inside those letters carried fears he had buried so deeply that even he had forgotten how heavy they truly were. I thought if I disappeared, Felix whispered, everyone would finally stop worrying. Hyun immediately turned toward him. Don't ever say that again. I wasn't planning to. Were. Felix didn't answer. His silence answered for him. Hyun inhaled slowly. I've spent months wondering why you stopped laughing when nobody was watching. Felix's eyes widened. You noticed? I notice everything. You never said anything. I was waiting for you to trust me. I was afraid. Of what? That if I told you the truth, you'd look at me differently. Hyun's expression softened. I already do. Felix looked away. There it is. What? The pity. Hyun gently shook his head. No. What then? The fear. Felix frowned. I'm terrified. Why? Because the strongest person I know has been fighting alone. Those words broke something inside. Felix that years of loneliness had failed to touch. His breathing became uneven. His hands trembled. Before he realized it, tears slipped silently onto his sleeves. He tried wiping them away. Hyun caught his wrist. "You don't have to hide here. I've forgotten how not to." "Then remember, I don't know how. We'll learn." The promise was simple. No dramatic speech, no impossible guarantee. Just 2 words. "We'll learn." Outside, dawn slowly began replacing the storm. Gray light crept through the windows. The room that had felt suffocating only hours earlier now seemed strangely peaceful. Felix looked toward the pale morning sky. "When did you become this brave?" Hyun smiled faintly. "I didn't." "You locked everyone out." "No." He looked directly at Felix. "I locked the world out." The difference settled gently between them. For the first time in months, Felix understood. Hyun hadn't pushed everyone away. He had protected the one person who had spent too long pretending not to need anyone. Morning sunlight finally reached the wooden floor. The rehearsal room no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the first place, where 2 broken hearts had allowed themselves to become honest. Neither of them had been healed. Neither of them had solved every wound left behind by years of silent battles. But for the first time, neither of them was carrying the weight alone. And sometimes, the first step toward surviving was not finding the perfect answer. It was simply hearing someone say, without hesitation, "Stay," then choosing to stay together. The sunrise painted long streaks of amber across the rehearsal room, revealing details neither of them had noticed during the storm. Dust drifted lazily through the beams of light, and the polished floor reflected 2 exhausted figures, who looked older than they had only a few hours before. Somewhere outside, the city was waking. Car engines hummed in the distance. Birds called from the trees beyond the parking lot. And the ordinary rhythm of morning carried on as though the night had never happened. Eli remained seated against the wall, his knees drawn close to his chest. Sleep had never come. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of old memories returned. Hospital corridors washed in white light. Unanswered phone calls. Stages filled with cheering crowds that somehow felt quieter than the loneliness. Waiting for him afterward, Hayden stood by the window with a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. He watched raindrops slide down the glass in slow, uneven trails. "You should eat something," Hayden said without turning around. "I'm not hungry. I wasn't asking." A faint smile appeared on Eli's face despite himself. "You always become bossy when you're worried. And you always joke when you're scared." The smile disappeared just as quickly. Hayden finally faced him, noticing the tiredness hidden beneath Eli's calm expression. There had always been something unusual about him. Even on the happiest days, there was a sadness buried so deeply that only someone paying close attention could recognize it. "I keep thinking," Eli whispered, "about how easy it became to pretend." Hayden sat beside him again. "When did it start?" Eli took a long breath before answering. "I don't know. Maybe after everyone started calling me strong." Hayden frowned. "Isn't that a good thing?" "It is. Until people stop asking if you're okay because they assume you'll always be fine." Silence settled between them once more. Hayden understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. There had been countless moments when he had hidden his own fears simply because everyone expected him to stay composed. Leadership, friendship, responsibility. Sometimes they became masks so convincing that even the person wearing them forgot what was underneath. A vibration interrupted the quiet. Hayden glanced at the phone resting
on the floor. More than 20 missed calls. Messages continued appearing one after another. "Where are you? Please answer. We're worried." Neither of them reached for the device. "They deserve an explanation," Eli murmured. "They do. But I'm not ready." "You don't have to be ready today." Eli nodded slowly. Outside the rehearsal building, clouds finally began to break apart, revealing a bright blue sky that neither of them had expected after such a violent night. Sunlight spilled across the pavement, warming the damp air. Hayden stood and opened the rehearsal room door. For a brief second, Eli stiffened. "You said you wanted everyone to leave." "I did. Then why open it now?" Hayden smiled gently. "Because hiding forever isn't healing." They stepped into the empty hallway together. The corridor echoed with their footsteps, each one sounding lighter than the last. The walls were lined with framed photographs from past performances, frozen moments of celebration that suddenly seemed different. Every smiling face in those pictures had been carrying unseen burdens. Success had never erased fear. It had only hidden it behind brighter lights. When they reached the building's entrance, Hayden stopped. The parking lot was empty except for a single bench beneath a tall maple tree. Morning wind carried the scent of wet leaves. Eli closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. It smells different. What does? The world. Hayden laughed softly. No. What? You do. For the first time in a long while, Eli believed that might actually be true. The pain had not disappeared. The uncertainty still lingered. But the crushing loneliness that had followed him for months no longer felt impossible to bear. As the two friends walked into the fresh morning light, they understood that healing would not happen all at once. It would come in quiet conversations, shared silences, honest tears, and the courage to let someone stay when every instinct said to push them away. The road ahead remained uncertain, but neither of them walked it alone anymore. The afternoon sun settled gently over the city, bathing the streets in warm gold as Hayden and Eli walked without, deciding where they were going. Neither of them hurried. After months of rushing from one rehearsal to another, from one performance to the next, the slow rhythm of ordinary life felt unfamiliar. People passed them without recognition. It was a rare gift. A child laughed as he chased a bright red balloon across a nearby park. An elderly couple shared a quiet conversation on a wooden bench. A street musician played a soft melody on an old acoustic guitar, the notes drifting through the cool breeze like fragments of forgotten memories. Eli stopped walking. I don't remember the last time I listened to music without thinking about work. Hayden glanced at him. Maybe that's exactly why we're here. They sat on an empty bench beneath a large oak tree. Fallen leaves rustled. Around their feet and somewhere above them, birds sang as though the storm from the previous night had never existed. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. Finally, Eli broke it. When I was younger, I thought success would make every fear disappear. And it only gave me different fears. Hayden nodded. I know. What about you? Hayden leaned back and looked toward the sky. I've always been afraid of disappointing people. You never looked afraid. I became good at pretending. Eli chuckled quietly. I guess we're both terrible actors off stage. They laughed together. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It was the first genuine laugh they had shared in a very long time. As the laughter faded, Hayden reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook with worn edges. I've carried this for years. Eli looked at it curiously. A journal? Not exactly. Hayden opened it carefully. Every page was filled with handwritten promises. Some were crossed out. Others had faded with time. I started writing these whenever life became overwhelming. Eli read one sentence aloud. Don't measure your worth by applause. He looked up. You wrote this? Hayden nodded. I forgot to believe it. Eli slowly turned another page. Real strength begins the moment you admit you're tired. His eyes lingered on the words. I think I needed this months ago. So did I. The wind turned another page by itself. Near the end of the notebook was a blank sheet. Hayden handed him a pen. Your turn. Eli hesitated. I don't know what to write. Write something you'll need to remember. For a long time, the pen remained still. Then slowly he began writing. His handwriting trembled at first before becoming steady. When he finished, he closed the notebook and handed it back. Hayden looked at the sentence. I don't have to carry every burden alone. Neither of them spoke. The words were simple, yet they carried more weight than any speech either of them could have given. As evening approached, the sky shifted from blue to shades of orange and violet. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long reflections across the quiet sidewalks. Hayden's phone vibrated again. This time he answered. A familiar voice came through the speaker. We've been worried all day. I know. Are you both safe? Hayden looked toward Eli, who gave a small nod. We're safe. There was a long pause before the voice replied. Come home when you're ready. The call ended. No questions, no pressure, only trust. Eli smiled. They're giving us time. They're giving us something even more important. What? They're believing us. The two friends stood and began walking, back toward the building where everything had unraveled the night before. Nothing about the place had changed. The walls were the same. The lights were the same. Even the faint smell of polished wood remained. Yet everything felt different. Because they were different, fear still existed. So did uncertainty. But now those feelings, no longer stood between them and the people who cared about them. When the entrance came into view, Eli stopped for just a moment. You know, what? I'm still scared. Hayden smiled warmly. So am I. Eli let out a slow breath. For some reason, that makes it easier. Together they stepped through the doorway, not as people who had solved every problem, but as friends who had finally learned that healing was never meant to be a journey completed alone. The lobby was almost silent when Hayden and Eli stepped inside. The receptionist looked up from her desk, relief washing across her face before she quickly looked away, respecting the quiet that surrounded them. The building, usually alive with laughter, conversations, and the distant echo of rehearsals, felt unusually calm. Someone had asked everyone to give them space. Eli noticed it immediately. They did this for us. Hayden nodded. They knew we needed time. They walked slowly down the familiar hallway until they reached the practice studio. The door was slightly open now, sunlight pouring through the windows, where the storm had once cast endless shadows. The room looked exactly as they had left it. The scattered chairs, the abandoned water bottles, the notebook lying on the floor. Yet it no longer felt like the place where everything had fallen apart. Instead, it felt like the place where something new had quietly begun. Hayden picked up the notebook and placed it on the piano near the wall. It should stay here. As a reminder? As proof. Proof of what? That difficult conversations don't destroy friendships. Eli smiled thoughtfully. They can save them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then voices echoed from the hallway. Soft, careful, uncertain. A gentle knock followed. Hayden exchanged a glance with Eli. Ready? Eli inhaled deeply. No. Hayden reached for the handle anyway. Good. The door opened. 4 familiar faces stood outside, each carrying the same mixture of concern and hesitation. No one rushed forward. No dramatic reunion followed. They simply looked at one another. Sometimes silence expressed what words never could. The first to step inside was Noah, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of fresh bread. I figured, he said awkwardly. You probably forgot to eat. Eli laughed quietly. You know me too well. I've been trying to. One by one, the others entered the room. Someone placed coffee on the table. Another quietly opened the curtains a little wider. Someone else switched on the speakers, letting soft instrumental music fill the room. No speeches, no accusations, just ordinary acts of care. Hayden watched them from the corner of the room, realizing how often people expected love to arrive through grand gestures when, more often than not, it arrived carrying breakfast. Eli accepted a sandwich with both hands. Thank you. 3 simple words, but everyone understood how much courage they required. As they sat together on the wooden floor, conversation slowly returned. Not about the previous night. Not yet. Instead, they talked about forgotten memories, embarrassing rehearsals, favorite songs, terrible cooking experiments, and the time Noah had accidentally set off the fire alarm while trying to make toast. Laughter spread naturally through the room. The heavy air that had lingered for months finally began to lift. Hayden noticed something different about Eli. He was no longer forcing his smile. It appeared quietly. Naturally, it reached his eyes. Hours passed before the conversation finally drifted toward more serious matters. I owe all of you an apology, Eli said. Immediately, several heads shook. No, Noah answered gently. You don't. I disappeared. You were hurting. I should have trusted you. Hayden looked around the circle. Trust isn't something people lose overnight. Everyone listened. It fades when someone believes they have to carry everything by themselves. Eli lowered his eyes. I thought asking for help would make me a burden. A long silence followed. Then Maya, who had spoken very little all afternoon, leaned forward. You've carried us through difficult days more times than you can count. Eli looked at her. She continued softly. Did you really think we'd leave when it became your turn to lean on us? His lips parted, but no words came. He had never considered that possibility. Not because it wasn't true. Because he had convinced himself he didn't deserve it. The realization settled over him like warm sunlight after a long winter. Outside, evening slowly painted the sky with deep shades of orange. Inside, the room glowed beneath soft lights, filled with quiet conversations and shared understanding. Nobody tried to erase the pain that had existed. Nobody pretended everything was suddenly perfect. Healing, they realized, wasn't the absence of scars. It was discovering that the people who loved you never asked you to hide them. As the last rays of sunlight faded beyond the windows, Hayden looked around the room. For the first time in a long while, nobody was pretending to be stronger than they felt. And somehow, that honesty made every one of them stronger than they had ever been before. Night settled quietly over the city. wrapping the streets in soft shadows, while the lights inside the studio remained warm and inviting. The conversations had become slower, replaced by comfortable silences that no longer demanded to be filled. For the first time in months, everyone seemed content simply sharing the same space. Eli stood near the large window, watching reflections shimmer across the rain-soaked pavement below. The city looked peaceful from this height, almost untouched by worry. You've been staring